Hello everyone, Colton Moore here, and welcome to the Moore Report. This is just finishing the third week of the legislative session, and I'm just now getting moved into an office. As you can see around me, the walls are pretty bare, but hopefully in some future episodes I'll give you a more robust tour of the office. That's why I'm pretty casual today. This week has been an extremely busy week. I've made a lot of different media appearances and been working on tons of different issues. This is kind of the first week that committee work has begun, and look forward to sharing with you all of that in some upcoming clips. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, Colton Moore here, coming to you from downtown Atlanta at the Capitol, and I'm about to sign some gun legislation to get dropped in the hopper. First one is the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Now, some Republicans and some folks want to rest assured that now that we have a Republican-controlled Congress, we don't have to worry anymore about crazy gun legislation or executive orders. But we know that every time Joe Biden finds a microphone, there's a good chance he's going to be talking about banning assault weapons or things that are associated with guns in general. And the Second Amendment Preservation Act says, sure, Joe Biden, you go ahead and do that. But here in Georgia, we're not going to put our law enforcement in the crosshairs of our citizens because we believe in the Second Amendment. So our law enforcement is not going to be responsible for enforcing any of those dumb executive orders or crazy gun laws out of Congress. And it's going to give us as citizens the right to sue those departments if they do. Now, I know I don't have to worry about this in my neck of the woods because my sheriffs campaign on the fact that they're going to protect the Second Amendment. But those crazy sheriffs in some of those more metropolitan areas, this is a way to protect those. Protect all Georgians, regardless of race or nationality. That's the Second Amendment Preservation Act. I'm honored to be the very first sponsor on this legislation, and I encourage my other Republicans to sign it as well. In addition to that, we have anti-red flag laws. Now, let me tell you what anti-red flag law legislation is. The federal government is taking money and they are dangling it in front of legislatures across the country, trying to convince them to pass red flag laws. This legislation says, hey, guess what, federal government? We're not going to take any of your money because we believe in the Second Amendment. Folks, I encourage you to go encourage your legislatures to sign on to this legislation. Let's protect future Georgians and ourselves from crazy federal gun regulations. Thanks. So that was a clip I did this week for Georgia gun owners describing anti-red flag laws and the Second Amendment Preservation Act. If you're eager to get involved in the fight to protect Second Amendment rights in Georgia, Georgia Gun Owners is a great organization to join. In my opinion, they're much better at pushing pro-gun policy than organizations like the National Rifle Association, who base all of their work on access to politicians. These folks at Georgia Gun Owners, they push for actual policy. Now, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, it's important that we get this passed this year. I mean, my best fundraiser in politics, the machine gun shoot, just recently became against the law by the ATF. Now, a lot of folks don't understand, how does the ATF able to just dictate what I do in my life? So one must understand the difference between rules by an executive branch and laws by a Congress or a legislature. So a lot of times a legislature may pass a framework that may only be 2 or 3 paragraphs, or in some cases like the National Firearms Act, and then they give these broad powers to the executive branch to do what they want to and define that law how they wish. Now, a legislature should trust in some instances an executive branch to do the right thing, but that doesn't always pan out. And that's what we're seeing today when Joe Biden continues to sign these executive orders. I mean, pistol braces We've got members of the legislature who own pistol braces who are now going to be felons if they're caught with it or they don't get an NFA stamp for it. Absolutely ridiculous nonsense. There's another interesting issue that kind of falls into that as well that I'm working on this week. A Chattooga County man thinks he's doing the right thing for his daughter, takes her to a mental health institution. He signs this thing called a 1013 form, and he essentially gives away his rights as a parent to this hospital. Now, this is something we're going to work to address, but the framework in the legislation that created the 1013 was very broad, and the trust was given to the executive branch to use that effectively and in the right way. So, in my opinion, the executive branch has too much power when it comes to that form, and hopefully we'll get some legislation that cleans that up. So that's always something to understand in our government, is the difference between rules of an executive branch and the laws that an actual legislature creates. This week, I appeared on Conservatives Talk with Justin and Jamie. Now, Jamie Palmer, one of the co-hosts, is the chair of the Floyd County GOP, and these two Floyd County gentlemen put on a great podcasting show. We engaged in great casual conversation, or colloquy, as we say here in the legislature, for an hour. We talked about all types of different topics, from state troopers, lack of medical retirement, gambling. We talked about the film industry, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, and we had a pretty heated exchange on immigration as well. So here are some clips from earlier this week to highlight some of those issues.
They all said that I was anti-law enforcement, okay? So I was going door to door, knocking on people's door, and they're like, Colton, why am I getting this flyer that says you're anti-law enforcement? And I'm like, look at the address that it came from. It didn't come from some law enforcement agency. It came from this subsidy of the Chamber of Commerce. So it's my goal to be the #1 law enforcement legislator in Atlanta. Starts with two functions of retirement.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it.
Has been making headlines. Although I will say a lot of our viewers may not have seen this because it made headlines in a kind of more of a liberal publication, that being the AJC. But it is that up on the chopping block this year is potentially are the special state tax credits. They're looking at taking away the ability for the state to issue out tax credits for businesses coming in, but they're also looking at potentially just putting restrictions on them and not limiting them altogether. So what is your stance on this? And from what I understand, you have some legislation that you're looking at potentially.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask you two guys to help me make a decision on some legislation here in just a second, but let me paint a picture for you. If you take all of the tax credits that we currently have, we're looking at like $8 billion with a B, okay, and tax liabilities. Mm-hmm. So those are indirect subsidies. That's money we will never receive as a government, right? Which ultimately, if the government never receives that money, that means all of our taxes end up being higher because we've got to subsidize these corporations. So, I've explained this on your show in the past, but they're indirect subsidies in the sense that they're transferable. So when you think of a tax credit, a lot of folks just think, oh, a company's getting a discount on their taxes. No, it's far more sinister, because what they do is they say, well, we spend X amount of dollars in the state. Well, here comes the state with like a 30% tax credit in the case of the film industry. Now, they get to sell that to whoever they want. So they go spend $100,000. They get a $30,000 tax credit. Now, the going rate on the market is probably 90 cents on the dollar. So now they can go sell this piece of paper, okay, for $27,000. They put that in their pocket. They can leave the state. They go to California. They can go wherever they want. Meanwhile, the Department of Revenue in Georgia gets this worthless piece of paper. You can't fund law enforcement retirement with a tax credit. Not possible, okay? It has no value other than the one who sold it. This is extremely dangerous. Think about this. Like, for me, the #1 proper role of government, like where tax dollars should be going first and foremost, is in infrastructure and transportation. Okay?
Absolutely.
You go back to the ancient Romans, the ancient Syrians, they used every tax dollar they had on infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of aggregates, the cost of asphalt, the cost of construction materials in general have went up about 30 or 40% due to Joe Biden's inflation. Okay.
Yeah.
Has the state transportation budget went up 30 or 40%? No, it hasn't. But these film tax credits and everything else has. So, you know what, guys? I mean, I've got 3 pieces of legislation, and maybe you guys can tell me which one to bring on. The first one is a resolution to rename the state of Georgia to the state of Hollywood, because that's what we're becoming. Okay. The second is a total nuclear meltdown when it comes to the film tax credits. I got a piece of legislation drafted up that ends the film tax credits today and makes everybody who has one come in and cash it in. The only problem with that is it shortfalls the budget big time, okay? Like $4 billion, which maybe the legislature needs to feel some punitive damages for even putting us in this situation to begin with. So that's the nuclear meltdown. Then we've got another piece that just turns off the spigot. So if you think of this thing as a nuclear reactor, there's another way to kind of slow it down. And that's the one I think we'll probably submit and probably get some traction on. But it stops all the tax credits today. And if you have one, you have the right. You know, we're not going to renege on the offer that we originally gave you. You have the right to turn it in at a future point. But we've got to stop this dead in its tracks. And, you know, Chuck and I both are working on this. So all of Floyd County's representation in the Senate, we are both gung-ho about eliminating these tax credits.
Yeah,
I like it.
I really like that third option.
And I know that, you know, Northwest Georgia in of itself has just said absolutely not. But I want to get your take on what's going on with that. Not just the school issue, but on what Georgia's role is in the whole illegal immigration and the flooding of our southern border.
Yeah, I don't know where to start. Let me tell you, this will be one of the defining metrics of any politician, how they stand on this issue in the next decade. Okay, this is something that's still developing, but I think it's one of the most important issues of our time. And you know, they say every town is a border town. And I used to kind of roll my eyes at that and think, yeah, I mean, that's just what those people down on the border say. But let me tell you what, every town is a border town. And if you live in Northwest Georgia and you don't see it in your community, you just wait. It's going to get there.
Oh, yeah.
Coming from Dade County, where I come from, it's already a little more rampant in the sense that Governor Abbott's buses were cruising through town, and some of those buses were stopping and letting folks off. But there's also the human trafficking migrant part of it.
Yes.
Okay. My parents bought another house, and from the house that I grew up in, and my childhood home, they use it as an Airbnb. Okay. And my dad walks outside one night. This is in September, gentlemen. Okay. My dad walks outside one night, and there's like 20 Venezuelans walking around the front yard. Okay. They all have brand new clothes, but no luggage. And they don't claim to know any English. Okay. These people were clearly from a third world. Okay. They were taking pots and pans with plastic handles on them, putting them into the barbecue grill and into the oven and melting the plastic. Okay. So maybe they only have, you know, good cast iron skillets where they come from, but in the
Sounds like
Airbnb, we had plastic handles and they were being melted. Okay. They rented this as like, you know, what appeared to be like a little Texas family. Okay. We finally got them out. The house was ransacked. Okay. Absolutely ransacked. They only had one review when they booked it. By the time they left, that account had 5 reviews, all within the Chattanooga area. So if we consider there were 20 in that house and they got 5 other rental units going on that weekend, you know, there's 100 people. That cartel migrant train was moving through. Okay. I've made a pretty good relationship. Got a pretty good relationship with a couple representatives in Texas. And I was talking to one of these guys at a recent political conference. And he said that, you know, a good way to describe it is back when Trump was president, it would cost like $2,000 or $3,000 for somebody to go across the border. That's what you'd have to pay the cartel. Today, it's like 10 to 15,000. Now, some of these people, okay, they haven't seen $15,000 in 3 generations.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they are poor, broke, and damned. Right. You can't blame the migrant. And I think that's where we as Republicans mess up a lot of times. Right. Is if we think in a heartfelt way, you feel sorry for these people. They're obviously fighting for a better life. But what we can't forget is that they're having to hire a cartel to come across the border. Now, if they haven't seen $15,000 in 3 generations, how else do they pay for it other than becoming an indentured servant? Okay,
Yeah.
so we've got these sharp-dressed guys running around South Texas right now, and they'll go up to businesses and industries. They might go up to a local Mexican restaurant, okay? And then they say, hey, we're going to give you all these employees at 1/10 of the cost. The cartel is a mafia, in case anybody hadn't figured that out yet. So I would hate to be a migrant who just, indentured servituded myself for $15,000 and then work as an indentured servant and hope that they're keeping a good tally on their T-charts and their accountant's up to speed and knows when I've paid off that $15,000. Or else what do? They probably go back home to their families in Mexico and threaten them and just have them continue to work. Like we're taking ourselves back to the 1800s, okay? And these people, they're finding their ways into Georgia. Think about this. In Chattooga County, okay, in the 9th grade, just this year, they've had like 20 students show up who don't know English and may have like a 4th grade reading level. Okay, so how do we as taxpayers expect to fund a school? How do we expect our teachers who are supposed to be teaching, to the middle of the classroom, the smartest kids and maybe the least smartest kids, but you're going to inject these people who don't even know the same language and aren't even up to speed. But the Supreme Court says that we have to teach them. Catoosa County's 50 or more, okay, of these students who are not American citizens, who don't know English, who are coming with the Great Migration. Right. We as a state, I was reading one report the other day that said the state of Georgia, it costs us about $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion. Okay. And that's hospitals, that's schools, that's resources in general to take care of the current migrant crisis. I was talking to a state trooper the other day, guys. He said, back when Trump was president, he goes, we could pull over a truck on Interstate 20. It'd be full of migrants. We could call up ICE. They'd get it sorted. They get them deported. Done deal. Today, we don't even call ICE. And if we do, they don't show up. All we can do is just let them out onto the streets. I mean, we're in a very difficult situation. And, the governor's at the World Economic Forum, and he's saying, secure the dang border. Right? When he first ran for governor, he says, I got a big truck, so I can carry off criminal illegals myself. But there's not a dollar in this current budget to secure our border. Now, people say, well, how do you spend taxpayer money and secure the border? I think the first thing we need to do is we need to fund our attorney general to sue ICE for that $2.5 billion that this crisis is costing us. I think we ought to be spending money on the wall. Texas has already said, yeah, we'll start building some wall. We ought to be sending money to Texas and then send a bill, an invoice up to D.C. and say, pay it. And then take somebody like Ron DeSantis, who's going to run for president. And if we had a big fat invoice up in D.C., I guarantee you he'd be campaigning to Georgians. As soon as I become president, we're going to get that invoice paid for you. And maybe we should add an interest rate to it, the same that the IRS charges us interest when we don't pay on time. So anyway, get my blood pressure up. But
no, I hear you. And I mean,
over the years, you've heard me talk a lot about the film industry and the tax credits we as citizens give them. But there are roughly 200 tax credits that previous legislators have put into place that cost us all money, ultimately to fund our Department of Revenue. So one of the top priorities, and I couldn't be more excited about this by the Republican Senate caucus, is to take on these tax credits. So here's a brief clip of our Senate Majority Leader, Steve Gooch, highlighting this agenda.
Also for families. First, our agenda starts with bolstering opportunity and the innovation in the Georgia economy. First, we'll be conducting a prudent income tax reform and tax credit review. The wheels of this process were set in motion last year when the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee were empowered to undertake a thorough review of all state tax credits, deductions, and exemptions. A report is due later this year, no later than December 1st. However, I anticipate that parallel discussions during the session as we look at ways to provide the borrower tax relief over time will be done. I appreciate the work of our members, including Chairman Huffstetter of the Finance Committee and, of course, Chairman Blake Tillery of the Appropriations Committee for their attention on this important issue. In the same vein, with high inflation and rapid...
So this concludes this week's More Report. I'll see you again next week with some more clips of the action. Until next time, I'll be fighting hard to protect our liberties and freedom here at the Capitol. And as always, thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve as your state senator. And if I can ever give you assistance, or if you have any concerns or questions, always feel free to reach out. Thanks for watching.